Hi and welcome to this modern lesson on how to define your bring your own device solution. So in this tutorial I want to outline the processes and thoughts and decisions that you need to make when trying to roll out a bring your own device solution. So this is a step to take right at the beginning of this journey, long before you actually think about devices being in the classroom. And I think that the way to approach this is that there are two clear and distinct strands. There's the technical side of things, the who, what's, when and so forth, which I'll talk about first. And then there's the philosophical side to it as well, the side of it which asks, what is it I want my school, my institution, my district's bring your own device policy really to represent, to be about? What does it say about me, my teachers and my learners? So let's start with the technical side, because it's more straightforward to deal with in some ways. You have to ask yourself, or your IT department, what is it you are willing to support? Is there going to be a minimum standard? Are you going to allow a lot of old technology into the school? Ultimately, I think that the answer to this question is that there has to be a limit. There are going to be devices that simply aren't safe, secure, sophisticated enough to cope with whatever network you put in place. So it's very important that before you announce that bring your own device is happening, that you are clear as to what it is you mean by your own device. Possibly the best way forward is to have a list of devices that are acceptable, and even to take that a step further, you should consider further what you mean by device. Are we talking about device being any tablet or any laptop or any tablet or laptop? Where do phones fit into this equation? Do phones offer too much of a headache for you? There's the element of network reception, having 3 or 4G, which means security protocols can be bypassed. There are lots of questions to ask, and it's very, very important that you have answered all of those questions with the appropriate policymakers long before bring your own devices is mooted as an option in front of your students. My personal opinion is that if you're going to do bring your own device, you should make it as inclusive as possible. Beyond that, there are other considerations though. It's not just about the literal physical device. There are other things to consider. Is there going to be a minimum hard drive size? Are you going to allow cloud storage solutions? There are no rights or wrongs here, but there are lots of questions. There are decisions that need to be made. Is 16 gigabytes enough to get a student through X number of years of school, or is that unrealistic? Are you going to have to say, well, fine, if you've got 8, 12, 16 gigs, you also have to have access to things like Dropbox, iCloud, Google Drive, whatever it is. Really important that you are clear how, where, when students are going to store work. Because if you don't know, they won't know, and it can become very, very messy very, very quickly, I think. In a nutshell, a little rushed, but that's the technical side of it. Lots of questions. Best way to come up with solutions really is ask other districts, areas, schools, people what they have done. There are lots of people out there willing to offer advice, their own stories, experiences as to what does and doesn't work. There are no rights and wrongs, but there are ways that work better than others. That's definitely true. In an ideal world, bring your own device would mean everyone had a really up-to-date laptop or tablet with loads of storage, with loads of cloud storage also built in for free that you don't have to worry about curating or managing. But that simply won't be the case. So you have to be able to say to your students, okay, protocol 1 is save it to your hard drive. If that's not possible, save it to Dropbox. If that's not possible, then X, Y, or Z. That's what you need to do. So have a clear plan as to how it will work on a practical level. The best way for this to happen, for you to achieve that, is to run a pilot. Take a class, group of students, and get them to try it out. Get them to hit the hurdles that you don't want 900, 2,000, however many students there are in your institution to hit all at the same time. Just get a core group, 10, 20, 30 kids. Get them to tell you what works and what doesn't work. Get them to keep a journal or a blog of how they're progressing. Okay, so that's technical stuff. And we move on to the philosophical stuff. This is the stuff that teachers and students really care about. What's okay? You're going to have to write a policy for bring your own device. It's probably going to be different to anything that you've done before. It's really important that you're clear what is and isn't okay in your school. There are loads of ways that you can do this. A simple do's and don'ts list might be a reasonable starting point, but I think what you have to realise is that a bring your own device policy is about the interaction of these three groups: the individual student, the other students around that student, and the institution, district, whatever, as a whole. The combination of those three and how they interact has to be at the core of any policy that you write. I guess what's also important to appreciate is that bring your own device only works effectively if you already have a strong, clearly defined digital literacy strategy in place. If your students are a bit hazy about how to use the internet safely or even effectively, if they don't know how to search for material properly, if they don't know what it is to plagiarize from Wikipedia, if they don't know that there is any other search result other than Wikipedia, if they don't know that it's not okay to go and badmouth people on Twitter or Facebook, then this isn't really going to work very well for you. Bring your own device has to be born out of clear digital literacy strategy. If you've got that, then you're ready to move to this phase and consider the interaction. How is respect going to be defined in your policy between these three groups? Because that's what it ultimately comes down to. The student has to respect himself, but also his peers and also his school, college, university. That's what your policy needs to outline. Obviously there are specifics within that. I'm not going to define or write your policy for you, but what I would say is we perhaps come to another 3-point system of things that you definitely should consider mentioning specifically in a policy, and that is the authoring of content, making sure that you have outlined what it is you mean to be an author of content. That authoring content is the most important, impressive, amazing thing that your students will do. They can put real content that they make, take real ownership for, and they can put it out there on the web for the whole world to see and get feedback on that. And that's an incredible thing, but you have to define for them what is and isn't okay in that arena. Go hand in hand with that, the idea of copyright. They have to understand copyright. Your policy has to be crystal clear what is okay and what isn't okay when it comes to using other work that is out there to inform your own. And finally, as I've already mentioned, internet safety has to be really clearly outlined in your policy. What is it that you need them to know categorically that is and isn't okay about the way they use the internet, both for themselves and with others? If you get that right, then you'll be most of the way there. There are, of course, other things to consider. A whole host of other things, in fact. Okay, so what are these other things that you need to consider when writing your BYOD policy? Well, I think it's just a case of outlining the basics, being sure that everyone understands what is and isn't okay. So, simple things. Offensive language. Spell it out, make sure it's clear. Offensive language is never okay, and that is something that will be in your school's policies anyway, but you're just transferring that into the digital world. Using proxy gateways or other such workarounds. Our students are getting more and more digitally literate. They know how to bypass our security settings. In a way, what I said earlier about mobile phones is a moot point, because 3G, 4G or not, they will work out ways of bypassing whatever blocks we put in place. In some ways that's okay, in some ways that's natural, and if you've got strong digital literacy in place, then you shouldn't be doing that to abuse the system so much as just to test its abilities and their own. Nonetheless, your policy has to be very clear that bypassing system filters is simply unacceptable for whatever reason, good or bad. Next up, keep it about education. When they are in school, when they're using these devices, it is about education. It's about them learning. Game playing isn't for school, at least not in the way that they play games. If a teacher wants to use games in a lesson, obviously that's okay. But what I'm saying is, your policy probably needs to make it clear that the device, when it's in school, is for school, it's for learning. Because as much as we want learning and their other life, their life outside of school, to become merged, it's important still that there are some boundaries. So your policy needs to address one more challenging issue. Whose device is it? This is a really challenging question, because obviously the legal answer is it's their device. It's their device, whether they're in school or not. But what your policy needs to make clear is that when that device is in school, being used for school purposes, you have some sort of control over it. You can confiscate it. You can look through the content of it if it's deemed to be appropriate. Okay, and it's important that this is a time to talk about parental buy-in. Okay, parents are going to think this is great if you sell it to them in the right way, because it is great. It could be a game changer, life changing for some of your students. But it's important that they feel included and consulted. And if you do this properly, carefully, survey them, talk to them, get them in, chat to them, talk about the goals, the aims, the ambitions of this rollout, then they should also be willing to join with you in saying and supporting that when the device is in school, it basically becomes the property of the school. It's really important that they understand that your students understand that yes, it's their device. Yes, we're celebrating their innovative use of their property, but equally when they're in school, the school has to have some autonomy and ability to control what goes on that device and how that device is used. Okay, so those are just some extra things to consider when writing your bring your own device policy. So in conclusion, we've talked about how to go about defining what your bring your own device policy is going to include, actually writing the policy, the content of that, what does it mean to you and your institution to do this, what is it you want to get out of it, explaining how this can be something that creates respect as well as a better education. So in conclusion, things to remember: bring your own device policy isn't an excuse to lock everything down. It's about being flexible. There are going to have to be changes to your network settings, to your privacy policies, to you know what is and isn't okay in terms of internet use. You're going to have to review your banned list of sites. If you're going to have a bring your own device policy, every kid in the school bring in a device. Do you really want to shut down social media? Don't you want to use your digital literacy strategies to tell them Facebook isn't evil, Twitter isn't evil? Yes, you can misuse them, but you can use them really positively. Because that's what I would want from a bring your own device policy. I don't want to lock things down, I want to open them up. And that's terrifying. It's terrifying for IT personnel. It's terrifying in general. As a parent, I find that thought terrifying. But equally, if we aren't training our students up to respect themselves, other people, and their school, then we're not doing a particularly great job of educating them, full stop. They need to be able to use social media responsibly, and we're in a position to help them with that, and I think that is really important. And finally, be prepared. This is a crazy journey that you're about to embark on. There'll be things that you never thought of, that I haven't thought of, that will come up and they'll blindside you and surprise you in good and bad ways. Be prepared to be flexible. Be prepared to tear up the policy that you write 6 months down the line and completely start over, write a new one. Because that could happen. Because in a year's time, tablets might not be what people need in school anymore. Mobile phones might be different. There might be new technology that you haven't written policy to include. What happens when Google Glass becomes mainstream? What happens when Apple release a watch that can do everything a smartphone can do and more? There are going to be progressions, and we need to have policies that are flexible and that encourage change and are ready for change. And if you can have a policy like that in place before you get started, then rolling out bring your own device is going to be a much smoother, happier and beneficial experience. Just remember, this is a good thing that you're trying to do. Bring your own device is a way of empowering your learners. And if you're prepared to be surprised by what happens next, then you will have a successful bring your own device policy on your hands. I hope this was interesting, a useful way of getting you to consider how to piece together defining what it is you mean by bring your own device for your institution. Thanks very much.